Welcome to our deep dive today into the world of human trafficking. We've got a whole stack of sources here. First-person accounts, expert insights, investigative reports. We're going to extract the most crucial insights for you.
Yeah, it's a heavy topic, but understanding it is absolutely vital, especially when you consider it's a $150 billion industry.
Oh, wow. Okay, so let's start by addressing the elephant in the room, the Taken movie stereotype. A lot of people think this is all about foreign abductions.
Right.
But how accurate is that?
Yeah, not quite. While those situations absolutely do happen, they're not the norm. Our sources indicate that many victims are actually U.S. born, often from impoverished or marginalized communities.
So this is happening right here in our backyard.
Yeah.
That's unsettling.
It is.
Yeah.
One of the accounts we have details a 12-year-old girl in Washington, D.C., who was sold by a seemingly nice couple.
Oh, my gosh.
Really shatters that misconception that it only happens in far-off places.
That's horrifying. And it really highlights how traffickers often target those who are already vulnerable.
Exactly. Think about runaways and foster children. Young people who lack a strong support system, they're prime targets. And the average age of entry into prostitution for these kids is between 12 and 16.
Wow. 12 to 16, that's incredibly young. What makes them so susceptible to this?
Well, imagine you're a teenager. You feel lost and alone. You're craving stability, love, maybe even just a hot meal. A trafficker comes along offering all of that. It's easy to see how these kids get lured in.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to think about. Our sources also mention that LGBTQ youth, Black and brown girls, and indigenous communities are disproportionately targeted. Is that related to this vulnerability factor?
Absolutely. These communities often face systemic barriers and discrimination, which pushes them further to the margins. They might have limited access to education or job opportunities, leaving them more vulnerable to exploitation.
It's a vicious cycle, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how do these traffickers actually operate? What tactics do they use to ensnare these victims?
Well, one common tactic is the use of false promises. Think Fake Job offers modeling contracts or even scholarships. They dangle these opportunities in front of vulnerable individuals, painting this picture of a brighter future.
So they're essentially selling a dream.
Yeah.
What makes this tactic so effective?
It plays on people's hopes and aspirations. They see it as a chance to escape their current circumstances and make a better life for themselves.
Right. But eventually the victims have to realize it's all a lie, right?
Sometimes they do, but by then it might be too late. Traffickers are masters of manipulation. They use psychological tactics to break down their victims, making them feel dependent and powerless.
One of the sources that really stood out to me was Carla's story. She talks about falling for the romance trap. Could you explain that a bit more?
Of course. The romance trap involves traffickers showering their victims with attention and affection, building a relationship that feels very genuine. But it's all a facade. They use this emotional connection to manipulate their victims into sex work.
Carla actually described feeling loved and protected by her trafficker, despite the abuse that she was enduring.
Right.
It makes you realize just how complex the psychology of this is.
It is. Victims often develop something called trauma bonding, where they become attached to their abuser. They might not even see themselves as victims, which makes escape even more difficult.
It's incredible how they twist these victims' perceptions of reality.
It is. That's why it's so important to understand these subtle ways that traffickers operate. It's not always about physical force. It's often about psychological coercion and manipulation.
So we've talked about false promises and the romance trap. What other tactics are commonly used?
Debt bondage is another big one. Traffickers will charge their victims for everything: travel, housing, food, and even invent fines for disobedience.
So the victims are basically trapped in this never-ending cycle of debt.
Exactly. They're constantly trying to earn enough to pay off their debt, but the trafficker keeps finding ways to increase it.
It's like a modern-day form of indentured servitude. Our sources also mention something about branding. Is that as horrific as it sounds?
It is. Some traffickers mark their victims with tattoos or even brandings.
To assert ownership.
Precisely. It's a way of dehumanizing them and reinforcing their control.
That's chilling. It really highlights the depravity of these criminals. We've talked a lot about the psychological manipulation involved, but what about the role of drugs? Several sources mention that traffickers often exploit addiction.
Yes, drugs are a powerful tool of control. Traffickers might exploit pre-existing addictions or intentionally get their victims hooked.
And I imagine this makes escape even more difficult.
Absolutely. The addiction creates a physical and psychological dependence, making it harder for victims to break free.
So we've seen how traffickers use various tactics to control their victims. But where does the law come into play? Can't we just arrest the traffickers and rescue the victims? It seems pretty straightforward.
Unfortunately, it's far more complicated than that. You see, victims are often arrested as prostitutes instead of being recognized as victims of a crime.
Wait, seriously? That seems counterproductive. Wouldn't that just re-traumatize them and make them even less likely to cooperate with law enforcement?
You're absolutely right. It's a huge problem. And prosecuting the traffickers themselves is incredibly difficult.
I'm curious about that. What are some of the challenges involved in prosecuting these cases?
There's a whole host of obstacles. There's often a lack of resources dedicated to these types of investigations. Corruption within law enforcement can also be a factor. And then the fear that prevents many victims from coming forward and testifying.
One of our sources detailed a case where a trafficker named Vlad was sentenced to probation despite trafficking a pregnant woman.
Wow.
What could possibly explain such a lenient sentence?
It's a frustrating example of how the justice system often fails victims of trafficking. Sometimes it comes down to legal loopholes or a lack of understanding about the complexities of these cases.
So it's not always a simple case of good guys catching the bad guys.
No, it's not. There are systemic issues that need to be addressed. We need better laws, more resources for law enforcement, and a shift in how we perceive and treat victims. But that's something we can delve into a bit later.
That makes sense. Let's shift gears for a moment and talk about where this trafficking is actually taking place. Is it confined to certain areas, or is this happening everywhere?
Well, one place that comes up repeatedly in our sources is hotels and motels.
Really? That's surprising.
It might seem unexpected, but think about it. They offer anonymity, privacy, and temporary accommodations, a perfect setting for this type of criminal activity.
And I'm guessing the pandemic, with its contactless check-in and reduced cleaning, hasn't helped matters.
You're exactly right. Those changes have unintentionally made it easier for trafficking to go unnoticed. Criminals are always looking for ways to exploit vulnerabilities, and they've certainly capitalized on the pandemic's disruption.
So it's not just street corners and dark alleys anymore.
Right.
This is happening in seemingly ordinary places right under our noses.
Precisely. And that brings us to another key factor in the modern trafficking landscape: social media.
Social media. That's interesting. I can see how it could be used for recruitment. But is there more to it than that?
Social media plays a multifaceted role in the world of trafficking. It's used for recruitment, yes, but also for control communication and even advertising victim services.
Wow, so it's like this digital web that's almost impossible to disentangle. That sounds pretty bleak.
It's definitely a cause for concern, but social media also offers opportunities for awareness and prevention. We can use these platforms to educate ourselves and others about the warning signs of trafficking, connect victims with resources, and build a network of support.
So it's a double-edged sword. It can be used for evil, but it can also be a tool for good.
Exactly. And that's something we need to keep in mind as we navigate this complex landscape. It's easy to get lost in the darkness, but there are glimmers of hope.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Okay.
Because amidst all this talk of tactics and exploitation, it's important to remember that there are stories of resilience.
Absolutely. We have several accounts from survivors who have escaped trafficking and are now rebuilding their lives.
Like Carla, for example. After enduring years of abuse, she managed to escape and is now dedicated to helping other victims.
Her story is incredibly inspiring. It shows that even after experiencing the worst of humanity, it's possible to find healing and reclaim your life.
It's a testament to the strength of the human spirit.
I know.
And she's not alone. We also have accounts from other survivors who have found love, support, and purpose after escaping their traffickers.
Their stories are a reminder that there is hope even in the darkest of circumstances. And there are organizations dedicated to helping these survivors, providing them with therapy, housing, and a path to recovery.
One program that really stood out to me was Catch Court. It's specifically designed for victims of trafficking and offers a comprehensive approach to healing and reintegration.
Catch Court is a fantastic example of the kind of specialized support that's needed. They recognize that traditional approaches to criminal justice often fail victims of trafficking, so they've created a program that addresses their unique needs.
It's encouraging to know that there are people out there fighting for these survivors and giving them a second chance at life.
Absolutely. Their work is invaluable, and it gives us all reason to be hopeful. You know, one thing that really struck me as we were looking through these sources was the discussion surrounding major sporting events.
Yeah, you mean like the Super Bowl? I've heard those events are often linked to a rise in human trafficking.
Exactly. There's this widespread belief that these events attract traffickers and lead to a surge in exploitation.
It makes sense on the surface. You have a large influx of people, a party atmosphere. It seems like a prime opportunity for traffickers to operate.
Yeah, I can see why people make that connection, but the data actually suggests that there isn't a significant increase in trafficking during these events.
Really? That's surprising.
Yeah, it is. It turns out that what really increases during these events is awareness and reporting. Because there's already so much focus on security and law enforcement, people are more likely to notice and report suspicious activity.
So while these events might not necessarily cause a spike in trafficking, they do create a window of opportunity to shine a light on the issue.
Precisely. And that increased attention can be a powerful tool for prevention and intervention. Think about it. It gets people talking, raises awareness, and hopefully encourages more people to report what they see.
It's kind of like what we were discussing earlier about social media. It can be a double-edged sword, used by traffickers, but also a platform for awareness and connecting victims with resources.
You're exactly right. It's all about how we use these platforms and whether we're using them to empower victims or enable traffickers.
Speaking of empowerment, we came across some incredible organizations that are doing amazing work to combat trafficking. One that stood out to me was Catch Court.
Catch Court, yeah, excellent program. They offer a lifeline to victims, providing therapy, housing, and a whole range of support services.
And what's really impressive is that they take a trauma-informed approach. They understand that victims of trafficking have experienced immense trauma and need specialized care to heal.
Right. It's not just about punishing the traffickers. It's about supporting the victims and helping them break free from that cycle of exploitation.
Yeah, it's a holistic approach that recognizes the complexities of this issue.
Yeah.
We also came across some incredibly powerful survivor narratives.
Yeah.
Carla's story, for example, is a testament to human resilience.
Absolutely.
She endured horrific abuse, but she found the strength to escape and rebuild her life. And now she's using her experience to help others.
Yeah.
That's true strength.
It's a beautiful example of turning pain into purpose. And her story is not unique. There are countless other survivors who have reclaimed their lives, their bodies, and their dignity.
These stories are so important because they shatter the stigma surrounding trafficking and show that recovery is possible.
Right, and they also remind us that behind the statistics, there are real people with real stories. Stories of strength, courage, and resilience.
You know, one thing that really struck me was the role of poverty and economic desperation in making individuals vulnerable to trafficking.
That's a crucial point. Many victims are lured in with promises of a better life, of financial security, of a way out of their current circumstances.
And it's not just about the money. It's about the lack of opportunities, the feeling of hopelessness, the sense that they have no other options.
Traffickers prey on those vulnerabilities, and they exploit the desperation of individuals who are struggling to survive.
It's a cycle of exploitation that feeds on desperation. And it highlights the need for economic empowerment as a crucial part of prevention.
Absolutely. We need to address the root causes of poverty and create opportunities for people to build sustainable livelihoods. That's the key to breaking the cycle.
And it's a reminder that trafficking isn't just a criminal justice issue. It's a social justice issue. It's about addressing systemic inequalities and creating a more just and equitable world where everyone has the chance to thrive.
Exactly. It's about giving people the resources and support they need to make choices that empower them rather than choices that make them vulnerable to exploitation.
This deep dive has been incredibly informative, but it's also been emotionally challenging. The stories we've encountered, the suffering these victims have endured, it's heartbreaking.
It is, but it's important to remember that we're not alone in this fight. There are dedicated individuals and organizations working tirelessly to combat trafficking and support survivors.
And there are things we can all do to make a difference, even if it feels small.
Absolutely. We can educate ourselves and others about the realities of trafficking support organizations working on the front lines and advocate for systemic change.
Together, we can create a world where trafficking no longer exists. It's a vision worth fighting for. And it starts with each of us taking action.
You know, one story that really stayed with me was that police operation uncovering the Brazilian trafficking ring in the UK, the one where they were using surveillance and undercover tactics to gather evidence.
That was a fascinating case. It gave a real glimpse into the complexities of investigating and prosecuting these cases.
Yeah, it highlighted the dedication and skill of law enforcement officers who were working to bring traffickers to justice. But it also showed the challenges they face in gathering evidence and navigating legal hurdles.
It made me realize just how much work goes on behind the scenes and how important international cooperation is in tackling this global issue.
Trafficking is a transnational crime that crosses borders, so it requires a coordinated global response. Law enforcement agencies, NGOs, and governments need to work together to share information, resources, and expertise.
It's a reminder that the fight against trafficking is happening on multiple fronts.
Yeah.
From undercover operations to survivor support services to policy advocacy, we need a multi-pronged approach to make a real impact.
And it's not just about the big players. Individuals can make a difference too, even through small actions.
Like donating to organizations, volunteering our time, or simply raising awareness in our communities.
Every little bit helps. And it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in ending trafficking. We can't just sit back and wait for someone else to solve this problem.
We need to be active participants in creating a world where exploitation is no longer tolerated. One thing that really impressed me was the dedication of those working in survivor support services. The therapists, social workers, and advocates.
Yeah, they are truly on the front lines of this fight, providing a lifeline to victims and helping them heal from trauma and rebuild their lives.
It's incredibly challenging work, but it's also incredibly rewarding. To witness someone who has been through such horrific experiences find healing and hope, that's what makes it all worthwhile.
It's a testament to the power of human compassion and the unwavering belief in the possibility of redemption.
You know, as we've been going through all this material, it's become clear that trafficking often operates in plain sight.
Yeah, it's not always shadowy figures in back alleys.
Right, like we see in the movies.
Exactly, and that makes it even more challenging to detect and combat.
Because it's so easy to overlook those signs, especially if you don't know what to look for.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. We need to educate ourselves about those common indicators of trafficking.
So what are some of those indicators? What should we be looking out for?
Well, there are a number of red flags. Sudden changes in behavior, unexplained injuries, or signs of fear and coercion. Those are all things to pay attention to.
So if someone seems withdrawn or anxious, or if they have injuries they can't explain, those could be warning signs.
Exactly. We also need to be aware of the industries and situations where trafficking is more prevalent.
Like certain sectors of the hospitality industry or construction or agriculture.
Yeah.
Places where workers might be more vulnerable.
Precisely. And we can't forget about the online spaces where traffickers recruit and groom victims.
Right, that's a whole other layer of complexity. How can we be more vigilant in those spaces?
Well, it's about being aware of the tactics that traffickers use online. They often create fake profiles, pose as potential romantic partners, or offer job opportunities that are too good to be true.
So it's about being skeptical and doing your research before engaging with anyone online, especially if they're promising something that seems too good to be true.
Absolutely. And it's about trusting our instincts. If something feels off, it probably is.
What should we do if we see something that raises concerns? Who should we contact?
There are hotlines and resources available to help. The National Human Trafficking Hotline is a great place to start. They can provide guidance and connect you with local resources.
So we can't just turn a blind eye.
Right.
We have a responsibility to report what we see and help those who might be in danger.
Yeah, we can't afford to be bystanders. We need to be active participants in the fight against trafficking.
As we've been digging into all these sources, it's become clear that trafficking is a really deeply rooted problem. It's not something that can be solved overnight.
No, it's a complex issue with a long history. And it's going to require a sustained, multifaceted approach.
And it's going to demand our ongoing commitment. We can't just have a surge of awareness and then let it fade.
We need to stay engaged, keep learning, keep raising awareness, and keep pushing for change.
Because the fight for freedom and justice is never truly over.
This deep dive has been a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit.
Despite the horrific experiences they've endured, survivors have found the strength to rebuild their lives and use their voices to advocate for change.
Their courage is truly inspiring, and it's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope is possible.
Hope is what fuels the fight, and it's what will ultimately lead us to victory.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's hold on to that hope. Let's carry it with us as we move forward. Let's let it guide our actions.
And let's never give up the fight for a world free from exploitation.
Because every life matters. Every single one.
And together, we can make a difference.
We can, and we will.
This has been an incredibly eye-opening deep dive into the world of human trafficking. We've explored the complexities of this issue, the devastating impact it has on individuals, and the importance of awareness, prevention, and intervention.
And we've also highlighted the resilience of survivors and the dedication of those working tirelessly to combat this crime.
We hope this deep dive has empowered you with the knowledge and understanding you need to make a difference in your own community.
Remember, if you see something, say something. There are resources available to help, and your voice can make a difference.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay hopeful.